but there's also bocce ball, billiards, bridge, swimming, kayaking, and of course what's very popular with the senior citizens of Huron Township are cards such as pinochle, double-deck pinochle, and euchre. So if anybody's interested, this is the form. And you have to fill out this two-sided sheet. The front is the information as to what you'd like to participate in, and the back is emergency contact, phone number, and your signature. The prices are also included on this sheet.
And Pauline, those who are interested in signing up, the deadline's approaching quickly. Could you mention that, please?
Yes, the deadline is June 30th, which actually I would prefer to have them tomorrow, if at all possible, because I'm part-time, and I will take them down to the city of Flat Rock and deliver all of them. There's a bit of a process of inputting the stuff that I do from my desk, my computer, and then I hand deliver the checks, cash, and/or registration form.
Or you can mail it in too, right?
You can, and the deadline's June 30th. So it might be better to go into my hand than to mail it. Your choice.
Maybe tell them the age brackets?
Oh, well, that's a fun one. If you don't know, with the Downriver Senior Olympics, seniors are considered senior citizens at the age of 50. So, Class A, our age is 50 to 59. Class B, 60 to 69. Class C, 70 to 79. Class D, 80 to 84, with Class E being 85 and above. And we do have participants in all age categories, so
Any other questions for Pauline? Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
Item 5 is approval of the consent agenda.
So moved. Support.
Roll call, please.
Patterson,
Yes.
Trustee Glabe,
Yes.
Lazier,
Yes.
Katie, yes. McLennan,
Yes.
Supervisor Glabe.
Yes. We'll open up the meeting to any brief public comments. Anybody wishing to come forward, please do. Seeing none, we'll move on. That brings us to item 10A, which is the issue of opioid litigation, group litigation. You've been presented with several materials in advance of a meeting tonight regarding our possible involvement in joining a group litigation regarding this issue. Lisa Esser from Summer Schwartz is here to give just a brief overview, and anybody has any questions, we can address them to her. So, Lisa, if you would, please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for having me here. I'll try to be very brief, give you a general overview of what we're doing in terms of the opioid litigation. My name is Lisa Esser. As your supervisor said, I'm an attorney at a law firm, Summer Schwartz in Southfield. We do all types of litigation. I'm a partner out there doing class action, MDL, mass tort kind of work. So we've teamed up with several national firms, the big mass tort firms in this country, to go after opioid manufacturers and opioid wholesalers for the opioid epidemic that we're battling in this country and Michigan. We rank 10th in number of prescriptions that are issued. We have more prescriptions issued every year than we do a population. That means that every man, woman, and child can have their own 84-count bottle of 5-milligram hydrocodone pills every year. And that's been going on for the last decade, really since the late 1990s, but it's gotten bad in the last decade. So we have teamed up with these national law firms to go after these companies. And we are representing a lot of the Western Wayne Conference communities. We represent Canton, Northville, Livonia, Van Buren, Romulus, and what we are proposing is to put all of the Western Wayne Conference communities in one complaint filed in the federal court, and then it will be litigated in the Northern District of Ohio and in MDL, and it gets kind of complicated there, but you would all be joined in one complaint and taking on these wholesale manufacturers and wholesale distributors. Now, we represent over 500 municipalities nationwide. Besides Western Wayne, the entities I mentioned in the Western Wayne Conference, we also represent a number of other entities in the state of Michigan as well. So just briefly in terms of the litigation, when I say manufacturers and wholesalers and opioids, what do I mean by that? So opioids, we're talking about hydrocodone, Vicodin, OxyContin, Norco, morphine, fentanyl, those kind of things. The two cases, the manufacturer case, you're talking about Purdue Pharma, Johnson & Johnson, Endo Pharmaceuticals, the people that actually make the pills. And the claims against them are for the deceptive marketing. It's a very long story, but the short answer is they have been engaged in this kind of marketing to convince the American public and our local physicians that these opioids can be used for chronic long-term pain, and there are simply no peer-reviewed literature or studies supporting that. They saw a market where they could make a lot of money. They didn't have a product, so they took these opioids and put it into the pain market. The case against wholesalers has to do with the distribution of the pills. Under the Controlled Substances Act, they were basically given a ticket in the 1970s that said, you can be the middleman, you can be the car dealership, you can sell the car, make a profit off of it, but in turn, you have to tell us if you notice anything suspicious going on. And tell us as the DEA. You have to report to the DEA if there's any influx in pills, right? And you have to halt your shipments. Well, what we found out 2 years ago is that just wasn't being done. They didn't have the systems in place to even alert them to that, and they were never reporting suspicious orders. So that's the case against the wholesale distributors, and we're talking about companies like McKesson, Cardinal Health, AmerisourceBergen. They have 85% of the market. Now, these companies have been fined for this behavior over the years, so we know that these are viable claims. We know there's an underpinning here. McKesson paid the largest fine, I believe, in February of last year of $150 million. That's 1 week's profit. So this has just been the cost of doing business to them. So this litigation offers a number of things. One, injunctive relief to try to turn this thing around, stop selling, distributing this amount of pills, change the market for it, and also providing local communities resources. Because once you're an addict, guess what? You're always going to be an addict. You're always going to be battling that. So the community's going to need the resources for those people for life. So this lawsuit provides injunctive relief. It tries to recover costs that you've expended on police, fire, Narcan, rehabilitation services, you name it. Prosecution costs, courts. We see increases in retail fraud because people are trying to steal things to get their money for the pills. I mean, the tentacles of these things goes deep. And then the last part of the damages would be for abatement, meaning we would try to get funds for you, for your police, your fire, to get more people on board, for services that you're able to offer your community, and what I call inoculation, inoculating our youth, trying to prevent this from happening further down the road. So what we're proposing, like I said, we represent a number of communities. It's the same proposal that we've proposed to all the other Western Wayne Conference communities. It's a contingent fee. Unless there's a successful recovery, we don't get anything, and we front all the costs.
Any questions from the board? Okay. So if it's the board's pleasure to join the group litigation, a motion to, as presented, would be in order.
I would move that we, under the proposed motion or language of the motion, accept as presented.
Support.
Okay. Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
That moves us to our annual audit report from Plant Moran.
Good evening, I'm Beth Bailey, and this is Josh Eady, somewhere here. Here he is. I was the audit partner, Josh is the manager. We will try to keep it brief tonight as well. We know we've got folks here probably for something other than the audit presentation, so we'll try to keep it short. Just in an overview, so the audit opinion in your financial statement is unmodified, which is, again, is the highest level of assurance that we can give. It says your financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects. Josh is going to go through the slide package that has some detail in there about the general fund, the police fund, and the fire fund. We're also going to spend a minute on water and sewer rates. But just before we get into that, did want to point out a couple of things. One is that if you were to look at your budget to actual statement, it actually came in better than budget by about $500,000, which is good news. And the revenue really was only over by a slight amount. So really where you made up for that was on the expenditure side and just really keeping the expenditures in check. Also, you continued on your track of pre-funding retiree health care. We do have a slide on that with more detail, but that's really important because, again, I know we've talked about this before, but that's a liability that wasn't measured until a handful of years ago. So you've been trying to get to a good level of funding there. So anytime you can squeak out more money in your budget to put towards the funding, that's really going to go a long way because you can, at that point, invest that and hopefully get the rate of return. So that's less money that the township has to come up with if you can rely on those investment earnings. So this year you put in an extra $1.2 million. You have about $6 million set aside, which is about half of where you would be if you had your total liability funded. Another real positive for the community is that you did pay down debt by about $650,000, just your annual debt service payments. And when you look at the level of debt that you have, really in comparison to others and just in comparison to state limits and so forth, you have a really low level of debt. And most of your debt, the main portion of your debt, is really the Belden drain and some other drains. And the Belden drain has a dedicated revenue source for that in the special assessment that's tied to that. So overall, you're doing very well from kind of just an overall fiscal or financial health of the township. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. He'll go through the slides quickly, and then we'll spend a minute on rates.
Thank you. So I will be starting, as you can see on the screen and in front of you, with the property tax collections overview. And as you can see on this slide, this shows all the millages that you would pay as a citizen of Huron Township and how that's split among the different categories. The township categories are all on the right. So what the township is assessing is only about 25.7% of the total millages that are here. So if you turn the page, just kind of another way to look at this, if you're paying every dollar that you pay in tax, a quarter of that goes to the township itself. And so obviously there's a lot of money coming through the township. I would like to commend the treasurer and the township for handling all that money properly and getting that through. Oh, geez, I've got slides, sorry. So that's the dollar. Thank you. The next slide covers the general fund revenue over the last 5 years. And if you look on here, the revenue in total increased about 2.5% over prior year to $3,521,000. The main driver of that increase is the state sources, which down below you can see is the fourth line there, which increased by $109,000 to $1.4 million. Most of that came from the state shared revenue, which increased $104,000 this year. So that's what drove most of that. The line below that, you can see federal sources decreased from $152,000 to $96,000, and that's just a decrease in the amount of grants you received for the year. Property taxes have been pretty flat the last few years. There was a slight decrease this year, as last year had a small spike in the collections of delinquent taxes. But otherwise it has been fairly flat. The next slide covers the other side, the general fund expenditures over the last 5 years. Here, the total expenditures increased about 8.2% in the current year to $3,114,000. Most of that was in the contribution to the OPEB trust, that first line on the bottom, which you started increasing 3 years ago, and increased by $152,000 to $327,000 this year. So that is starting to contribute towards that liability. The third line there increased, that's the health, recreation, insurance, and debt service, increased by about $44,000, which represents the seniors center construction. Other expenditures were fairly similar year over year. The next slide shows the annual expenditures in relation to your unassigned fund balance. So if you're looking at that blue line, you can see that the unassigned fund balance has been decreasing year over year. Most of this has been because you have been assigning a lot of that fund balance to fund future obligations, as opposed to reducing your fund balance, considering your fund balance did increase overall about $600,000 this year. So if you're looking at these in terms of the unassigned fund balance as a percentage of the annual expenditures, however, you're at about 35.7% this year, down from about 48.1% last year. If you're looking at this without that OPEB trust contribution that we were looking at in the previous slide, it would go up to 39.9% and 51.2% respectively for this year and last year. But as a result of reducing this unassigned fund balance, you're down to about $1 million, which is a good place to kind of keep that unassigned moving forward in case you have any unexpected expenditures moving forward. The next slide covers the police fund. Here, revenue, that's the blue line here, increased about 4.7% to $4,383,000, and expenditures increased about 8.5% to $4,112,000. Most of that increase in the revenue was due to property taxes, which increased for police this year. And then while capital outlay decreased this year for the expenditures, salaries, the OPEB contribution, and pension contribution all increased this year to offset and then increase those expenditures. Which means at the end of the day, you've got fund balance, total fund balance this is, of $2,088,000, which is up about $215,000 over last year. And we would like to commend you on that recovery, considering it had been about $200,000 back in 2012. The next slide represents the fire fund for the last 4 years. And here, the revenues are down and the expenditures are down 18.8% and 27% to $1,026,000 and $962,000 respectively. And both of those are due to capital assets. Last year you had a large sale of capital assets, so there was a gain there, about $320,000, and there was also additional capital outlay in the fire fund last year, about $300,000. So that brings you back down to approximately where you were in 2015 in terms of revenues and expenditures. And then fund balance has been fairly stable over the last 4 years, down only about 0.7% to $885,000 in the current year. The next slide covers what Beth had been alluding to earlier. So you have your pension and retiree health care. And if you're looking at this slide, the first columns here represents the municipal employees' pension, which the blue line represents the liability. So you've got about $21.8 million there for the liability, and the assets represent about $14.3 million. So unfunded liability here, based on the actuarial valuation, is about $7.5 million. Now, based on the latest valuation, both the liability and the asset have increased, but it went from 66% funded to 69% funded. So that would be as of June 30th, 2017, or excuse me, December 31st, 2017. And so that continues to, you guys continue to increase your funding of that. So good work there. The other side represents the retiree health care. And there, the liability is about $11.6 million. The assets about $6 million, which means you're about 52% funded. This is the number under Public Deck 202, both of these, that you have to now report to the state how well funded you are. And I believe Karen has already submitted that report. And you're above both the thresholds here. So that's the good news here, is you're not going to be in that danger zone where you have to go through further procedures looking for waivers, things like that. So you're above the funding percentages on both of those. Next year, this retiree health care number will also appear on your financial statements, very similar to how the pension moved down to the financial statements a few years ago with GASB 67 and 68. So if you turn to the next page, this represents the retiree health care, but in a slightly different way. This is the last year that, and the financial statements will be disclosed this way under GASB 45. This is the old regulation about how this was handled. And basically what this represents is, if you look at the bottom, there are 3 rows. OPEB cost is basically what you should be paying in every year. The contributions are what you're actually contributing. And then the OPEB liability just represents the cumulative over or under on what you have been paying there. So you can see it been increasing to 2011 And then in 2012, you've got that large orange bar. You contributed almost $2.4 million that year, which brought that liability back down. And then from 2013 all the way through 2017, you've been consistently increasing the amount of your contributions, which has been driving that liability down. But again, I do want to point out that this is not the liability you would see on the financial statements next year. This is the liability you would see this year. And with that, I'll hand it back to Beth to talk about the water and sewer rates.
Thank you, Josh. Just wanted to spend a minute on water and sewer rates. We did do a very extensive study to look at the rates, look at the increases that are coming in. So from Great Lakes Water Authority, you would have had about a 3.2% increase that's expected for the coming year. South Huron Valley Utility Authority, we use an average of about an 8% increase. So you can see here that what is being proposed is actually not matching what I have in the file. I don't know if we've got the, do you have your?
Sorry, yeah, let me grab that.
Yeah. Well, I can go through this. Can I see what you have on your copies?
Is that the old?
Yeah. One second. Well, we can go through this. So we're showing here 2.9% overall increase in the water and sewer rates. And basically what this would be is 3% on the water rates. Hang on. Do you have the? Let me just make sure I'm looking at the right version. Yeah, so that's not what's up there. So let me go through just what we have here and what I have in my slide, which is really weird that it's a different one. So where we're at with the water and sewer rates is the rates from the previous year are correct on there, but the suggested rates are actually somewhat lower. So in total, we're looking at, for water, going from $5.46 to $5.56, with a 1.8% increase in the water rate. If you recall, I said Great Lakes Water Authority is passing through a 3.2% increase to the township. So your overall, you would take what they pass through plus all of your costs to come up with the rate that you're ultimately charging to your residents. So we've got that set at $5.56. The water capital charge is staying the same, and I will say that the water capital charge at 53 cents, that has really done a nice job in the last several years of building up reserves so that when you do have larger projects, you don't have to go out and bond for them. So within the study, we had 3 different projects that were around $900,000 a piece for different water mains, storage building, and so forth, that you're able to use the reserves that have been built up versus having to go out to get any sort of new bond for that. So that's helpful because you don't have to pay all those bond issuance costs either. What's not on this slide would be the water debt rate. So the water debt rate was at 29 cents. That is going up to 38 cents, which is a 9-cent increase. And that's just following your amortization schedule, the debt service payments that are due on the debt that's currently out there. So that's sort of a fixed number. The sewer rate is going to move from the 707 to 728. So that number is correct up there. That's about a 3% increase. And again, South Huron Valley is going up about 8%. And then the sewer debt rate is going from $1.57 to $1.53, so that's a slight decrease. And again, that's just tied exactly to what the scheduled debt service payments are on your sewer debt. So overall, it's a combined 2.4% overall increase. So with that, if anybody has any questions about any of the assumptions that went into the study, apologize for the graph being a little outdated there. I think that was from an earlier. But the good news is, instead of 2.9 that we must have talked about at some point, we ended up at 2.4%. So that's the good news. Any questions on the water and sewer rates before I get into the letter? Oh,
You
great.
could just email me the updated slide when you guys get it.
Yeah, it's in, do they have this? You think? Do you have your water and sewer rate study? It's in there on page 4, is this chart, but the correct version of it. And then you should also have a letter that's addressed to the Board of Trustees. And this is our end of audit letter. I'll go through this pretty quickly. On item 2, or page 2, we do talk about internal control related matters. The only item that we had would have related to some journal entries that we helped to propose at the end of the audit or during the audits. These are end of the year type of adjustments. They aren't anything, your day-to-day records are in excellent condition. So these would just be some things at the end, like helping to record some of the post-employment benefit obligations, recording some items related to South Huron Valley and so forth. So historically, we've helped with those, and we would have helped again this year. On page 3, we talk about, down at the bottom, accounting estimates. And really, the only significant estimates in your financial statements relate to the assumptions that are used for both the pension and the retiree health care. So the actuary has to go through and set assumptions, get some input. So just to let you know that some of those numbers are based on those assumptions that may or may not actually come to fruition. As auditors, we look at the assumptions and make sure that they're reasonable, which they were. Over on page 6, we do have some other recommendations and related information. The first few items have to do with some IT security items, which I'm not going to go over in a lot of detail. We do have an item on here about looking at some of the refundable deposits, looking into those, investigating some of those to see whether or not those can be adjudicated and closed out. We also have on the rubbish reserve, just to look at setting a policy for what's the appropriate level for your rubbish reserve to be at. And then timesheets, there are a lot of manual processing that goes into the timesheet function, and so if you were to look into automating that, that might save time and also limit the potential for any errors that could occur. And then we have an item on the OPEB liability. So the township has used a method that's allowable for you to calculate your own retiree health care liability. So you've been doing that on a complex spreadsheet where everybody's listed out and there's a lot of calculations happening there. With the move to the new way of reporting for retiree health care that Josh alluded to, you are going to be hiring an actuary to do that calculation for you going forward, because it's there's a lot more precision that has to go into it, and there's a lot more room for potential error, and that number is now going to be showing on your government-wide balance sheet. So there's more importance around the accuracy of that number. At the bottom of page 6, we just talk about a couple of new legislative items. Your annual filing that you do with the state now needs to be done electronically, online. Karen has that ready to go as soon as the audit report is accepted. There's a new chart of accounts coming out. That implementation's been delayed, but I'm sure Karen and her team will be working on that. And then the rest of the items really relate to retiree health care and pension, so I won't go into those in any detail unless somebody has a question.
Okay. Any questions of Beth at the moment?
Just a quick statement, back on page 6, some of your recommendations, I just want to let you know that the treasurer's office, she implemented a new password policy.
Okay.
So we took care of that. I terminated the rights of all non-active employees through all the township software systems, so there's no
Great.
issues anymore with that. And then I'm not sure where you guys got your info with the data backup. I contacted our IT provider. We have 1 on-site and 2 off-site data backups for both our email and our our main operating servers.
Okay.
So they said if you need any verification, just to get with them and they can send it to you.
Right, and I think our comment was around like physically where the machinery is kept to make sure that you're also,
I know there was issues with air conditioning and
Yeah.
DPW's looking at that now.
yeah, so the backup process would be very important to make sure that the data is available. But if something were to happen to your server too, because of some of the environmental, even with the backup, you might not have something to run it on. And I'm not a computer expert by any means, so.
We did address it. I
Sounds
just
like
wanted,
you've gotten
yeah,
into
to
all
let
of
you
these
know
issues, which
we
is
took it on.
good. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
actually,
you.
all the recommendations are being acted on as
Yep.
the clerk knows, so, thanks,
Okay.
Beth.
Thank you.
So what we'll need from the board is a motion as presented here with respect to the the change in the water and sewer rates.
I'll make a motion to accept the recommendation of the auditors for the new water and sewer rates.
Support.
Could I have a moved and seconded? Can I have a roll call on that, please?
Sir. Patterson,
Yes.
trustee Glabe, Lazier,
Yes.
Katie, yes, McLennan,
Yes.
supervisor Glabe.
Yes. Thank you, Beth and Josh. And also, as usual, want to thank Karen Carney, who does extraordinary work in working with our auditors, and we thank her for her dedication. Thanks, Karen. Our next item is a sale of property, which is a vacant lot. The materials that were given to you both in packet and previous email. From time to time, the township has comes across some property that it owns from years ago. It usually is a tax reversion situation. These parcels are of no really value of interest to the township. We kind of inherited these things, and from time to time, someone in the neighboring community who lives adjacent to these properties often will make an offer to purchase on a property such as the one presented here tonight. The parcels that we end up getting are a result of people normally not paying tax on the property. And that happens a lot of times because the property just becomes, it's not valuable. They can't build on it. It's of no use to the property owner, so they often will let it go for taxes. And that's how the township often receives these types of properties that, again, don't have a value to us. As a public entity, we don't pay tax on it. So in this particular case, if we sold it to this individual who's interested in buying it, that would put it back on the tax roll and we would start to receive revenue from it. So as presented here, it'd be my recommendation that we would sell the property to get it back on the tax roll and start collecting revenue on the property.
So moved.
Support.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Item 10E be the appointment of Treasurer Colleen Lazier to the Planning Commission. Currently, we have a vacancy on the Planning Commission as our board representative, and it'd be my recommendation that the board appoint Colleen Lazier to fill that vacancy.
So move.
Support.
Any discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Item 10F is sale of property, the Willow Methodist Church. Currently, the church owns a parcel that actually was acquired by the township years ago. It had a particularly specific reference in the deed that addressed the property being used for church purposes, more specifically the parsonage. That no longer is a concern or need of the church. They do have an interested buyer in the property. We're being asked to adopt the enclosed resolution that would simply allow the sale to go through. It doesn't affect the township in the least. It just allows and facilitates the sale of this particular parcel of property.
So move.
Support.
Any discussion? Moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, say
Roll
aye.
call, please, for the resolution. Katie, yes, McLennan,
Yes.
supervisor Glabe,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
trustee Glabe,
Yes.
Lazier.
Yes.
Okay. Item 10G is a vehicle maintenance and service agreement. This is actually an extension, and this is something that our treasurer, Colleen Lazier, kind of orchestrated for us for bus service, and that being done through the local school district garage, and it's proved to be a very beneficial relationship, and we're looking to extend that, correct? So a motion to be in order.
Motion to support 10G as presented.
Support.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Item 10H is the Township Office and Police Department Copier Equipment and Services Agreement. Kathy Carlton Bay has spent considerable amount of time analyzing the office needs for the police department and the township hall relative to our copiers. Our existing contract is maturing allows us an opportunity to engage in a new contract, new services that would better suit our needs. You have a proposal in front of you for adoption tonight. It'd be my recommendation that we approve this. If you have any questions, Kathy is with us tonight. Otherwise, a motion be in order.
I make the motion. Support.
Okay. Any discussion? Moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Next, we have election inspector pay scale. Clerk Katie?
Yes, sir. So I've been doing a lot of research with the other municipal clerks in our area, and currently we are kind of right in the middle as to what we pay our election workers. Many communities are higher than us, some are lower, but it is the general consensus that even the highest paying as of today is going to raise their rates because retention's such a problem. They're usually 14-hour days for the people that work the polls, and then 8+ hours for the absentee counting board and the receiving board. So I would like the board to consider my recommendation of raising the per diem rates for the election workers as I presented in the packet. So that would be my motion.
Approve the election inspector pay scale as presented.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Clerk Katie. We'll open up the meeting to public comments. Anybody wishing to come forward, please do. Okay, seeing now we have a presentation from our police chief, Everett Robbins, and he's going to address our civilian academy, who we have members here this evening.
I want to thank the board. First of all, I'm going to turn this over very shortly to Sergeant Robert Kelch. As I've presented many times before, one of the main obstacles and main goals of our department is to build our community partnerships. Over the last several weeks, we've gotten to know and work with several great people through our Citizen Police Academy. It is our second graduating class, 2018. The background on this is that Sergeant Kelch, this is something that he believes heavily in. He's done some research papers, and he presented this to me about a year ago. And he has done an outstanding job with it. I think that anybody that you talk to will say the same. So I'm going to back off. I'm going to hand this over to Sergeant Kelch, and he's going to present the 2018 second annual Citizen Police Academy graduating class.
Good evening. As you can see, there's some people in the back have similar shirts. Those are our 2018 graduates for the Citizens Police Academy. The class started on April 17th, and it was 12 weeks. The class gave up 2.5 hours every Tuesday to listen to us, talk about what we do, and become transparent so they have a better understanding of what we do on our jobs. They got to meet Chief, the K-9 officer, along with Officer Hickman. Talked about narcotics. I got a tour of the 34th District Court. Got to meet the 3 sitting judges. We talked about use of force, and what's so good about this class is that there was a lot of discussion of both sides. So there's a better understanding where they were coming from and where we were coming from, and the discussions were very informative. And at the conclusion of the class, they were allowed to do a ride along with the officers, and some of them have taken a great opportunity to do that, and they've really enjoyed it. And then one of our class graduates, Mary, has done several of them, and she's really enjoyed those. So, but instead of me sitting up here talking about their experience, I'm going to ask Joe Ferrillo and Kimberly Rhodes to come up and discuss their experience.
I'll flip a coin. Ladies first. No, okay. Someone's
No,
got
it
to
was,
pick up the ball and run with it.
It was a real nice experience. I mean, I kind of had a little bit of experience doing some charity events and getting to know some of the officers and the police, fire, and the mounted units, and just seeing how active they are in the community. So it was nice getting the opportunity to get a behind-the-scenes look at what they do. I mean, I know they don't get credit for a lot of what they do, and especially on social media, you hear a lot of stories. It's nice being able to meet with them and them being as open and honest as they were, and being able to see things from their point of view. And like you said, I mean, they were very open and honest about things. We learned a lot in that class. I mean, it kind of helped us realize the things that they do, you know. A lot of us, I think, already notice a lot what they do, but it really opened our eyes on what they deal with on a daily basis and the level of service they give. I mean, we learned a lot, like the tasers. I mean, a lot of that. I mean, one thing I thought was interesting, that they pay extra to have ones that only go for 5 seconds, so that they don't do excessive force. I mean, the steps that they take, and I mean, not taking that class, that's something I never would have known. But they go through great lengths on a lot of things to make sure that they serve the people's best interests, that they're fair, and that they're doing things the way they should. It was nice having that opportunity to be able to learn a lot more about that.
Thank you.
I had the opportunity to do Romulus Citizens Academy a couple of years ago, and then I had the opportunity to do Huron this year. Both academies were amazing. I am very fortunate that I was able to do Huron, especially with, like Joe was saying, all of the social media, all the negativity regarding police and everything that's going on. It was amazing to get that front row view of what they go through and why they're doing the things that they're doing. And then doing the ride-along is amazing. If you have never done it, please do it, because you're actually getting a front row seat of what they're put into on a daily basis. And you're like, wait a minute, you actually do that? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, are you, I was that person that was like, does this make you nervous? Are you worried with like everything that's going on nowadays and how you're treated? And the officers were like, yeah, but it's your job and you gotta keep, our township safe. All of the officers absolutely love this township. They do their best to protect it. And it was amazing to actually be able to conversate with them. And then they're so open, like Joe was saying, as far as they're an open book. If you have a question, ask it. And we did, trust me. Our class asked a lot of questions to try to understand what was going on, and they were so open with answering them.
Yeah. Thank you.
And to kind of extend on what she's saying, I mean, they're open and honest with everybody, and I mean, and I know Kimberly hit on it with social media. You see a lot of it, hey, I hear they're sitting on 275. Why aren't they doing this? The biggest thing I would recommend is people take the time to call and talk to Sergeant Kelch.
Or
Talk to Chief Robbins. I mean, they have an open door policy. If you hear this stuff, instead of getting online and
Spreading it?
spewing, trying to think of a good word, but I guess I'll hold back. But call up there and talk to them, because they do have an open door policy. And if you call, you're going to learn something, and you're going to be a lot more comfortable with the level of service you are getting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Also, too, Chief Hinojosa opened up his doors to our class, and we were allowed to see what goes on with the fire department, which they found very informative. So, but tonight, closing out with our Citizen Academy is the certificates that we will be giving them for the completion. The first person I'd like to introduce is Amber Darnell.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Then there's Kimberly Rhodes. Hi. Thanks, Kim.
Should I stand up here?
Thank you. Megan Lyons. Thank you. Kristen Gambino. Thank you. Lindsay Shank's not here. She has strep, so we'll make sure she has her certificate. Mary Swiatek. Joe Ferrillo. Huh? She put it out there. Brendan Russo's not here tonight. Scott Wellman. And Mike Ansberger. Mike, we'll bring it to you. And that is our 10 graduating. Thank you.
If we could, with the board following the meeting, if we could get a quick picture at their request, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergeant Kelch and Chief Robbins. This program continues to be very popular, and it's getting the notoriety that it appropriately deserves. And the one thing I know our police department does stress, it is transparency and openness. Our chief and our officers are always open. They're here to serve the public, and they're very approachable. And their job is tougher today than ever. It just gets tougher, I think, by the year. But I think these type of programs, these educational programs, really help share with the public, just what they go through on a daily basis, how tough it is. And I think it also reminds us as residents how we can help our police officers, because it's really a team effort. And it's just a good reminder too to, we can be additional eyes and ears in the community that can help our officers do their job. And Lieutenant Patterson did it for many years, as did our clerk Katie. And it's just a very difficult job these days, and more support we can give and to be understanding, I think, is very helpful. So thanks to all of you, and I know the board shares its appreciation of all of you who have given so much of your time to participate in the program and to open yourselves up and to be informed, and hopefully you'll spread that information among the rest of the residents and be a resource to them as well. So thanks to all of you very much.
When does the next one start?
I am looking to start that one in January 2019. Information will start going out in November for applications. We're going to start opening it up to a lot more of the community now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. Any comments from the Board of Trustees? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Support?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you and have a good evening.